Have you ever thought to yourself, what is my purpose? Why am I here? What is this world about? What should we be doing? How should we use our time? Is what I'm doing enough? These are wonderful thoughts to bring to the soul from time to time. And I was reflecting on these last night. And when I woke up this morning, I had an image of myself as the tiniest grain of salt compared to the vast universe. I wasn't a grain of sugar to sweeten the world. I was a tiny grain of salt. I was grounded and small, and that felt enough. Now this straight away reminded me of an old folk tale, which I've told from time to time in therapy. There was once an old king who had 2 daughters. He loved them both dearly. And he said to them one day, "My daughters, what is the sweetest thing on earth?" And one daughter said, "Father, it is sugar." The father turned to his other daughter and said, "Well, and what do you say?" And she said, "Father, it is salt." And the king frowned at her and said, "What? Salt? Take that back. The sweetest thing is not salt." But she would not take it back. She was firm on what she'd said. And after some argument between them, he cast her out there and then in the clothes she was wearing. She was sent off into the forest. She walked for many, many days with hardship in her heart, in her soul, and in her body. And at last, she came to a clearing and sat down on a rock. Along came a prince on a horse, and he said to her, "What has happened to you?" And she told him. And when he heard that, he said, "Would you come to my castle and be my bride and be my queen?" And the princess said, "I will." And so when he arrived back at the castle, there was a great celebration. And they decided the wedding would be held in a few weeks' time, whilst invitations would be sent far and wide to all the kingdoms around. And of course, the princess's father received an invitation. It didn't say who the prince had found to be his bride, but it said the prince in this neighbouring kingdom had at last found himself a bride. On the day, the king travelled with his servants to the palace where a beautiful wedding and banquet was prepared. The tables were laden with every kind of food and meats and delicacies, exotic sauces, beautifully prepared vegetables. There was music, and at last people took their seats, for the wedding banquet was to begin, and in came the prince, and beside him, covered by a veil, was his new bride. They sat down at their top table, which was a sign for everyone to begin eating. Well, you could hear the clatter and the excitement in the air of the utensils dipping into the foods and the pouring of the sauces onto people's plates. There was chatter, there was excitement in the air. But as soon as people had put the food into their mouths, there was complete silence of a strange kind. And then a little voice far in the background on a far distant table said, "Oh dear, this food has no salt." And then someone else on another table said, "Oh dear, yes, this food is tasteless." And so a roar of commentary about the food, which had looked so beautiful, but had no taste. It had no salt, went around. And then after a while, the noise of a chair being pushed back from a table was heard, and an old man stood up in royal robes. And he cried out with pain and sorrow, "Alas, alas, I banished my daughter, for she said that salt was the sweetest thing on earth. She was right and I was wrong. Oh, woe is me." And then he slumped in the chair, exhausted and bereaved. And at that point, the new king turned to his bride and nodded. She stood up and took off her veil and revealed herself. Her father looked at her, and she looked at him and spoke to everybody and said, "All is forgiven. Father, I forgive you." And there were tears and there were reunions, and the banquet was held. And the new king and queen lived happily ever after.